there'll be people join us, but there we go. Thank you, Michelle. So welcome everybody. We're here today just to talk through the process of the statutory reviews that take over the 3 partnerships. So the Adult Safeguarding Board, the Children's Safeguarding Partnership, and the domestic homicide reviews that are undertaken under the Communities Board. So just a bit of housekeeping. There will be an opportunity at the end of the session for you to ask any questions. Feel free to add in it to the chat box as we go through, so that you don't forget the question. If I just ask that people who are not speaking to keep the camera off and the microphone off. Obviously, if you do need to take a call or anything, feel free to do that. And we'll just work through the presentation, and there will be an opportunity to view it again if you do need to dip out, because we are recording today. So one big thing that we need to stress is, obviously these subjects can be very emotive and people can find some information distressing. We're not actually going into any case detail today, but obviously there might be trigger points for people. So if there is anything, please feel free to take some time for yourself. Obviously afterwards as well, you can get in touch with your manager or ourselves if you need any support. So I think what we're going to do now is look at the next slide, please, Shani. So we're going to talk through part of the process. So Shani, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Shani Mortimer, and I'm here just talking, sort of representing the Children's Partnership this morning. So the bit that I just wanted to focus on initially was why we do statutory partnership reviews and why they matter. So one of the big clues is in the title. In terms of it being statutory, we have a legal obligation to do these reviews, but we also invest quite a lot of time and resource as local partnerships, because we really see the value in the learning that comes out of doing these partnership reviews. So they help us to collectively understand the circumstances that led to tragic outcomes. So from a partnership point of view, that's understanding the role that every agency has played in supporting a vulnerable adult, a victim of domestic abuse, or indeed a child and their family, and seeking to understand from a multi-agency perspective those circumstances and that have led to tragic outcomes. It helps us to identify patterns, system gaps, and opportunities to better protect individuals and families. And again, crucially, this is really from a multi-agency perspective, helping us to understand how our multi-agency processes have worked, or where there might be improvements, how information has been shared across different systems, and where we could strengthen, find opportunities to better protect individuals and families. So even though we all do slightly different review processes, they all are very, very similar in terms of they all bring together agency information, they all bring together insights from practitioners. So we really encourage frontline practitioners that have been involved with supporting families and individuals to come to practitioner events and share their insights and experiences. And we also try and include the voice of families and crucially victims in these circumstances. And even though, like I said, that we all do slightly different reviews, we've got a different legal basis for doing these reviews, all of them aim to build a complete picture of someone's experience.
Thanks, Shani. So I'm Alison Clarkson. I'm the Service Manager for Domestic Abuse here at Kirklees Council, and I lead on the domestic homicide reviews. And as Shani says, although the reviews might be slightly different, that one of the big outcomes from all the reviews is the learning. We will never know from a review whether we could have changed the outcome. That's not the purpose of the review. The purpose of all of our reviews is to ensure that as services and agencies and as a local authority, we learn from what's happened, and we are highly committed to that. So we actually have a task and finish group, the Embedding Learning from Reviews task and finish group, where we come together, a representative across Children's Partnership, Safeguarding Adults Board and Communities Board, to actually look at the learning that's coming out of those reviews and how we can cascade that across the partnership. So putting on sessions like this, these learning bite sessions, because we've got that commitment to the learning from the reviews. And we invest a significant time and resources in terms of ensuring that service delivery, that practice improves in certain areas where there's found to be things that haven't progressed as maybe they should have done, or there've been missed opportunities, or actually services haven't been able to meet the demands of victims. The learning will always focus on that understanding of systems and processes and how our practice can be strengthened. So just to give an example of learning from reviews. So you may or may not be aware that we have a MARAC meeting which supports the victims of high-risk victims of domestic abuse. That MARAC meeting happened online every 2 weeks, and we heard up to 40 cases. Part of the learning from one of our reviews was that that MARAC needed to be a more frequent meeting, and also we needed to reduce the caseload because some of the MARAC partners were facing a little bit of fatigue. So that's just one example of some learning that's come from a review, is that MARAC changed to from a fortnightly to a weekly meeting and is now in person, so we can have that better conversation. And so the learning is around how we can just drive continuous improvement across all services. As I said, not to ensure that, or we can never prove or evidence that the tragedy might not have happened in the first place, but it's ensuring that as services we're learning from that.
So as part of the process, we do invite staff to practitioner events. So that's any staff member that has been part of the review, the part of that person's journey. So that's really important. We get valuable learning from that. So as well as Alison's just alluded to, looking at systems and processes. So, you know, if you're a new worker, did you get the right support from manager? And again, it's not a criticism across the board, because obviously we know demand and capacity across the partnership can increase. How you're able to manage the workload? Is it a new situation? Because, you know, with learning, we can't expect staff to know everything at the outset. So you might come across a situation where you might need additional support. Is your manager providing that support, and are you able to like seek any other resources, etc., that might help you with the best possible practice for that case? So it's really important in practitioner events we understand what it was like for staff to work with this person, and if there was any challenges that come with that practice. So we invite staff to a practitioner event, and we try to ensure that staff are supported, because although we say that it's non-blame, when you've worked with this person that's, you know, sadly died, it can feel blamey. So we really try to put that wraparound support. We encourage managers and the service manager or head of service or whoever's representing that agency to be part of that review to support those staff. And we do offer some sessions afterwards, especially with the domestic homicide reviews. We do offer additional sessions for wellbeing, or we may do that as part of a safeguarding or child practice review if deemed necessary. But that's extremely important, obviously, for the staff as part of that review process, but as well, again, it promotes that culture of learning. We have found that a lot of staff in practitioner events sometimes have a bit of a light bulb moment where we're talking about the case. So for instance, we did a joint domestic homicide review and safeguarding adult review. The report is available on the CaseHab online resources in the contacts and practice resources. But the situation with that was the female in that review was advising that her husband was becoming more aggressive. Now, unfortunately, that was taken as verbal aggression, and it wasn't. It was actually physical, and it wasn't unpicked. So when we talk about that professional curiosity, you know, what do they actually mean by what they're saying? So again, you know, it promotes that culture of learning because that staff member recognised maybe that they should have delved a little bit deeper because it might have had a different outcome. Not that I'm saying the outcome of the case would have changed. It would have just maybe, you know, increased that risk assessment, that lens and what was going on at that time. And again, we really try and promote that it is a non-blame and culture, and that it is just to get the best possible learning we can from the review, and so we can support the workforce moving forward.
Okay, so we're just going to spend a little bit of time now, as we mentioned at the start, although all of those different processes, so the DHR, the SAR and the CSPR all result in a review and result in learning, the actual definitions of and reasons why we might initiate a review are slightly different, and the processes involved are slightly different as well, because we're all conforming to slightly different guidance and legislation. So for a domestic homicide review to be commissioned, then the criteria for meeting that is the death of a person aged 16 or over has or appears to have resulted from violence, abuse or neglect, either by a person to whom they were related to or had been in a personal intimate relationship with, or was a member of the same household. And the key part of those two elements are that the review is held with a view to identifying lessons to be learned from the death. So a lot of people will be familiar about the intimate relationship. So when there's been a death due to a homicide committed by somebody who has been in a current or previous intimate relationship, but people may not be aware of the fact that it might be wider family members, so siblings or adult child on parent abuse as well. With nationally, there is an increase in matricide cases, so adult sons who are killing their mothers. There is a national increase in that at the moment. So that's the criteria. We will also review suicides as well. So it's not just homicides, but suicides where there is real causal link between the person taking their own life and domestic abuse taking place. So we will review cases even if there's been no disclosure or no history, no reports previously around domestic abuse. Even if there's no agency had any awareness that there was any domestic abuse or no concerns about the relationship, or even with individuals where there was very, very minimal contact with agencies, we will still conduct that review. So it doesn't matter how many times they went to see the GP, it doesn't matter how many services were involved with that family or with that individual. If they've died because they've been killed by somebody they're in an intimate relationship with either now or have been previously, or somebody who's in the same family structure or household as themselves, we will open that review with a view to identifying lessons learned. And then the process that we follow is set out by government guidance. At the moment, we're still under the domestic homicide review guidance. We know that the government are going to be changing and moving across from domestic homicide to domestic abuse related death reviews or DARDAs, but at the moment, the DHR, the domestic homicide review guidance, is still the guidance that we are to follow until the DARDA guidance is published. So we start off the process once we've received notification from the police or from another agency that there has been a death that could potentially meet that criteria that we've just gone through. And then we will seek to put a panel together, and we will identify an independent chair. So somebody who's not connected to any of the services that is involved and has full independent oversight to lead the review and author the report. And since May 2026, so very currently, anyone who's commissioned as an independent chair has to have completed the DHR chair training. Prior to 2026, they didn't have to. It was advised, but they didn't have to have completed it. But now we can't appoint anyone to be that independent chair if they've not undertaken the accredited training. So we appoint a chair, and we then have that conversation with family and loved ones to inform them that we are commissioning a review and giving them that opportunity to be able to feed into the review. So one of the things that we like to have in the reviews is a pen portrait of that victim, to be able to put that victim at the heart of the review. And we need family, and it's really important that family get that opportunity also to be able to see the outcome of the review as well and the learning that's come from it. Once we've had that conversation, then we'll move across to requests for chronology and agency reports, known as IMRs, individual management reports. So the chronology is almost like a catalogue of all the contacts that agency had with not just the victim, but the perpetrator or children, if there are children involved. And the chronology gives us that overview of which services were involved, what the service was, how they responded, any concerns that the services had, but also then to have that independent analysis of somebody who wasn't connected with that case to be able to look and see, was that standard practice? Is that expected? Was there a missed opportunity there? And then the agency report will then add to that analysis. We also look to see if there's any parallel investigations. So Jackie mentioned earlier that previously we've done a joint DHR and SAR, we've done joint DHR and mental health reviews, and we've also done joint DHR and CSPRs as well in the past. There may also be independent police investigations, and we'll also link in with the coroner as well. From there, then, we move to holding that, as Jackie mentioned, that practitioner learning event. So having that session face-to-face with practitioners that were directly involved with the family so that the author can really understand what the presentation factors were, what engagement with services was like from those individuals that were there as frontline professionals. And all of that information will be condensed into a report that will be written by that independent chair, and then the report will be agreed with the panel members and then shared with partners. The key part of that report will be the recommendations. What is it that needs to happen now as a result of the learning from that report? And agencies will then complete action plans following that to evidence that they are implementing that learning. The report is then shared with the Home Office as part of their quality assurance process. So there's a Home Office quality assurance panel that will review all reports and provide feedback. They may ask for changes, they may ask for additions or revisions to the report, but they will then tell you that that report can be shared. And so at that point then, we will share the report, we'll share the learning. I will caveat that we may choose in certain circumstances not to publish a report in full if we believe that the publication of the report may be too triggering and traumatic for families, or may, by sharing the information, even though it is anonymised, may cause a safeguarding concern for families or those that had fed into the report. Then we will not publish the report in full, but we will share the learning. And that'll be done through creating learning brief documents, webinars, information that will be cascaded across the partnership.
So for a safeguarding adult review, the person has to have care and support needs, and we need to suspect or know that the death has resulted from some form of abuse or neglect. We also do look if individuals are still alive and present, but the person has to have suffered significant harm. So, for instance, I suppose if they've the result of the abuse or neglect has had such a detrimental effect, I'm just thinking like losing a limb or serious sexual harm. Something like that we would consider. We can also do what we call a discretionary SAR. That would still be statutory under the Care Act, but that might be if a person might not really met the threshold for care and support, but we know that there is absolute valuable learning as well. We can commission a discretionary SAR, but the other element as well is that we have a concern around how the partnerships work together to safeguard that individual. So everything that the Safeguarding Adult Board does, as well as the response to DHRs and children's practice reviews, is we're looking at that multi-agency response. So how could agencies have worked more effectively together? So looking at things, you know, a common theme that comes out of all reviews is that lack of information sharing and that lack of multi-agency working. So agencies often working in silo, not coming together for a joint response. So even if people are working in silo, it's about coming together and reflecting on whether that's working or not, and looking at how they can collectively work together to formulate more of a safeguard for that individual. So again, I won't go through the entire process. Alison has gone. Our reviews are very similar. However, we're not governed by the Home Office, but I don't know if people are aware, there's now a national safeguarding adult board. They're going to be overseeing some of the reviews. We do have a national SAR library. So you can actually go to that to look at a theme to see if there's been a SAR undertaken nationally, which will continue with the National Safeguarding Adult Board, but they'll continue to look at the themes coming out of the SARs. In addition, there's been 2 national audits on SAR activity, which have been used to adapt processes and how we disseminate learning, etc. But it's the same process as Alison's gone through. We do commission an independent author. That's done under procurement process because that's public money. We liaise with the families and ensure that they're as much part of the review as they want. We consider whether or not that person, family member, needs any advocacy as part of that review, and more specifically, if the person's still alive and we've commissioned a review, do they need any support in going through the review? As advised, we do the chronology and then that will ultimately come in a report. So as part of our dissemination of requesting information, we ask for a multi-agency chronology. So each agency will provide what they've done in date, format, when, and so we can see a timeline. But as well, we do ask then for an overall synopsis of, now you've looked at your individual responses, how does that look? Is the elements of good practice? Where have things gone wrong? What are your reflections on your agency's involvement for that particular person? And as we've talked about already, the learning events, then the reports published, learning is shared, and we try and influence change in practice.
Thanks, Jackie. In terms of the children's reviews, child safeguarding practice reviews were established under the Children Act 2004, and this is to review cases where children have died or been seriously harmed and abuse or neglect is known or suspected to be a factor in the death or serious injury. So working together to safeguard children is the statutory guidance that outlines that process in more detail, but the responsibility for learning lessons and overseeing that learning from reviews sits with the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, and who delegates that kind of authority to local safeguarding partners. So the beginning part of the children's review process is slightly different in terms of there's a requirement with children's reviews to undertake a rapid review. So within 5 days of a serious incident, we are required to notify the national panel. We've then got 5 days to make a decision about whether or not we feel that decision meets the criteria to take forward what they call a rapid review, which is required to be completed within 15 days. That gives us an initial kind of overview of what's happened for that child and family and any initial learning that's been identified for agencies. The rapid review will then inform our decision as to whether we're going to do a more in-depth review, and that decision is also notified to the national panel. So after that, the process is very similar, I guess, to the DHR and SAR process, with the exception that child reviews don't usually involve individual agency reports. Agencies are required to do a chronology and, contribute to a panel and sit and discuss the findings of it in an overall report, but there's not usually a requirement for individual agency reports, unless has been a recent experience when we've been jointly doing a review that's a joint child review and domestic homicide review. Because of the requirement of domestic homicide reviews to do individual agency reports, we've made that a requirement for that particular process, but it's not normally part of it. And then we also have that kind of national oversight, like DHRs, in terms of that we're required to submit our report to a national panel and then publish that on our website.
We should have said at the start that we apologise in advance for all of the acronyms that we use as part of this process. So if there is any acronym that we have used that you don't know what it means, then please feel free to just stick it in the chat. But hopefully as we introduce a new acronym, we will be explaining it as we go along. So what we thought we'd do is just show you how the different processes align, because in the main, they are the same, the processes are the same, but there are a few differences, and that's, as I said earlier, it's because we're all actually aligned to slightly different legislation, slightly different practice. But one thing we are trying to do across all of our reviews is be a little bit more streamlined in terms of the pro formas and the paperwork that we are asking people to fill in. So a chronology for a DHR should be the same document as a chronology for a SAR, and making sure that that really maps across the three, so you're not being faced with different documents. So it's still work in progress, but it is something that we are committed to, is just aligning our documentation a little bit more where we can and where we've got the flexibility to be able to do so. In some circumstances we haven't got that flexibility. I'm not going to go down every single element because you can see there quite clearly. So DHRs, we don't have that rapid review, and we don't have the flexibility to conduct proportionate reviews. Sometimes in SARS or CSPRs, if there's very similar circumstances, then there is the option to do thematic reviews. We don't have that option in DHRs. We have to just focus the DHR on the actual circumstances of the person that has died. So we don't have that flexibility to be able to do and provide different methodologies for review. In the SAR process, then, there isn't that ask to do the individual reports, but what is being built into the chronology paperwork for the SAR is, as Jackie said, that analysis, that professional oversight to really help determine whether that practice that was evidenced was expected? Was that usual or typical, or was that something that needs to be picked up and addressed by that particular agency? And then right down at the bottom, so all of the reports have that overview report with an executive summary, the action plan, which then gets signed off by the partnership board. The CSPR and the DHR then go to external quality assurance, but all across the same, all will be the learning. Even if the full report isn't in the public domain, the learning will be published.
So I did touch on practitioner events. Like I said, this is a real valuable part of the review. Some authors will specifically ask that we run a separate frontline event and then a separate manager event. Sometimes that's because it's felt that staff are more open when the manager's not there, but that will just be determined as part of the review. Sometimes, obviously, frontline staff want to bring the manager along, which is fine, we can have a conversation, but it is to provide that real detail around what it was like to work with this person and the family, you know, how they were supported through practice, was there any sticking points in the case as a board, and across the partnerships we do have escalation protocols. So we, as advised, we push that multi-agency working. If there's an agency across the partnership that was maybe not wanting to become involved for whatever reason, everyone has a different legal basis to be involved, but if it was deemed that they needed to be, how was that achieved? You know, was that the escalation process, etc., used? So just to really get down to what it was like for practitioners at that time moving through the review. And we'll also have already picked out some learning points, so we'll be discussing them with the frontline staff, so that it's that continuous loop of learning as we progress through that particular review.
Sorry, I didn't know if there was another slide there, Jackie. Is there anything else?
No, that's fine.
Okay, sorry. So we have already touched on involving families in the review process, and we can do this in lots of different ways. We're really keen to support the family, to engage in the process however best suits them. Some families choose not to engage with us at all. Lots of families have an advocate that can support them to participate in meetings. We've had reviews where the family's advocate is part of the panel and sits as part of that process. We've had circumstances where the independent author or chair might meet with the family quite regularly to get their input and insights about, you know, learning that's coming from the panels. We've had families wanting to meet the panel, so we can really accommodate that in a lot of different ways, and we think it's a really crucial part of the work that we do because it provides us with a really unique perspective on a victim or family's experience of services. So we know what we think we know from looking at records and talking to practitioners, but involving families gives us the opportunity to understand, you know, we know what we think we said. What did you actually hear? You know, and to really explore how we support families in that basis. And I think particularly with domestic homicide reviews and SARS, probably getting the family's perspective really helps us to paint a picture of the individual who's at the heart of that review in a way that agency records might not. It gives us a much more sort of rounded picture of a person as an individual and not just kind of their contact with services or their support needs, but actually who they were as a person. And it's really important for us as partnerships and as panels to keep the individual at the centre of that process, a focus. So involving the families helps us to honour the victim, and it ensures that the victim's voice, values and lived experience are central to our review. We've also found that it enhances accuracy. So there might be different perspectives on on how information was shared or not, and getting information from families helps us to understand our processes from that perspective. It also improves trust and accountability, because a family bereaved by any one of these kind of horrendous personal circumstances deserves to know what we're doing in the background as a result of that, and bearing in mind that they might also be dealing with a criminal investigation, a coronial process, lots of other kind of independent review processes that might sit alongside ours. I think that's why advocacy becomes so important, because it can be very complicated for families, but involving them in our process kind of helps improve trust and build our accountability. And I think particularly when we talk about recommendations and improvements that we want to make to our services as a result of reviews, telling families what we're going to do as a result of the review that we've done really helps us to hold us accountable as a partnership and as organisations. It's not, this is not just sort of an empty promise. This is something that we've really made a commitment to doing something about. It helps us to support system change. So as I mentioned, families have been involved in lots of different ways, and one of the ones that we had a few years ago, the family were really instrumental in going out and talking to some of our partner agencies about their experiences, and involved in delivering training and things like that. So that can be obviously really, really impactful. And the feedback from families that have participated in some of these processes is that the participating in this review process has helped them to understand sort of what happened and what the limitations of support are from agencies, but also being involved in helping to make improvements has been quite an important part of their journey. So it's obviously a really important part for us. So it strengthens the quality, fairness, and ultimately the humanity of our reviews, and ensuring that learning is meaningful and truly reflects a victim's realities. So in terms of our statutory reviews, and so we've talked about the importance of using these reviews to give a voice to victims, to learn from tragedy, to improve our multi-agency collaboration, communication, information sharing, and our multi-agency processes. We've talked about it needing to strengthen our safeguarding practices and ultimately driving systemic change. But I guess one of the real focuses on our session this morning is trying to encourage staff across all of our partners to help and support with these kind of partnership reviews. So some ways that you may be asked to help is to help us with our initial scoping and information gathering. And if you've ever received any kind of scoping request, they can be a little vague. And it's because when something has initially happened, people in the partnership don't know what we don't know. We don't know how far back in the records to ask you to look. We don't know what contact you've had with the person at the subject of the review. So the initial scoping and information gathering really is to help us to build a picture of what contact that person has had with local services. And it's really important that we cast that net as far and wide as we possibly can and get as much detail back in that really early stage to help us to make our decision about whether or not we feel that the circumstances meet the criteria for review. When we're asking for chronologies, which are far more detailed, and we will set out a prescriptive kind of timescale of what of when we want agencies to look in their records, we do try and be proportionate, because it's a very detailed process in terms of looking through your records and identifying every single contact that you've had with that individual or that family over a particular period of time. So we don't make the decision to do it over a long period of time lightly. It would only be in circumstances where we feel there's some really significant learning from going back over a long period of time. We also might ask staff to participate in practitioner events, as Jackie said, so that might be either attending in your own capacity or supporting a member of your team. And in some circumstances, agencies will also be asked to prepare individual agency reports, but all of us do provide templates and detailed guidance, and usually offer like a drop-in session as well. So if people are asked to do those individual agency reports, there's lots of support available from the partnership to help you to do those. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Alison again.
Thanks, Shani. And I was just about to say, or to start this with exactly what Shani's just said, that if you haven't been through this process, then all across all the reviews, we do provide advice and guidance and support for people, even whether it's your first chronology or your first report or your 25th, we will always be there to provide that advice and guidance and support on what to include, because what we're trying to avoid is chronologies that are not beneficial and are not helpful in us being able to identify learning. So if a chronology isn't laid out or doesn't provide us with the information that we need in order to be able to gather that learning and has that analysis with it. So that might be where events are recorded without a clear sequence, without context, or without an agency response. That actually blocks the learning, and it doesn't allow us that potential to be able to see what the contact was in order, what was seen, what was witnessed, what were the presenting factors, why was that contact had in the first place, and what is that oversight of the agencies that are now reflecting on that. Then that chronology, even though it's been completed, and we recognise the amount of time that people will spend completing chronologies, but those chronologies will actually block learning. It will obscure the frequency of incidents that have happened and any escalations that need to take place. Hidden decision making and agency roles will be hidden, and it also prevents that pattern of recognition and that meaningful analysis. So if the chronology isn't completed sufficiently, it means that may delay the process of us being able to identify that learning, or there may be that might translate into weaker recommendations being set following that review. However, a good chronology will enable that analysis to come through. So where we've got a really clear sequence that might link events, decision making and responses, will give reviewers that real clear defensible view of what happened when and what was changed and why, and that clear sequence is evident. So we'll be able to show any patterns in risk, patterns in behaviours, patterns in escalation of events and frequency over time. The chronology will link an event to an action and then a subsequent outcome. So what happened, what was the action by the agency, and what was the outcome following that is a really good way to think about when you're writing your chronologies. The date was this, we had contact because of this event, we did this, and the outcome was that, and having that really clear flow through. And the chronology then will be able to identify any missed opportunities and any threshold decision makings. So it allows that independent reviewer to ask what happened, what did the agencies do, and if anything needs to change, what should have happened differently. So that's ultimately what we're asking for when we're asking for a chronology. There's just a couple of examples here. So on the left-hand side, these are all fictionalised. These aren't anything linked to any individual cases. This is just purely fictionalised. On the left-hand side, the left-hand column, there are some examples of actually where we might have a chronology entry, but it doesn't meet the needs of what we're looking for. It doesn't have that event action analysis lens to it. So we might just see a rough date, just that rough date or various dates isn't strong enough. We need to have it a timeline in place so that we can really overlay all the different agencies in a timeline together. So we need specific dates, ongoing issues between the victim and partner agencies are aware. That doesn't give us that sufficient, this was the contact, this was the action that was taken, and this is the analysis of that. So we can then look at the alternative to that on that top row is we've got a specific date there. We know the police attended a report of a physical assault where B pushed A. There was a DASH risk assessment completed and graded as a medium risk and a MARAC referral made. So it's really specific as to what happened, what the contact was, the action that was taken and the outcome there. That's essentially what we're looking for. And then it might be that the one member of staff completes that part of the chronology, but then the bit that we needed is, do we agree that that was a medium risk assessment? Do we agree in that circumstances that a MARAC referral should have been made? Was that a good decision making? Was that process right? Similarly, down almost at the bottom, we've got, and we do see this quite a lot in terms across all of our reviews, is talking about victims disengaging. So a victim's disengaged from a service. Again, we need that more specific information of what the date was. So we can see in that middle column there, the IDVA case closed. After missed appointments, there were no escalation or professional curiosity recorded. So there we've got a real missed opportunity there. And the person completing this chronology is able to identify actually that that member of staff who closed that IDVA case because of a missed appointment didn't have that follow-up. There was no professional curiosity. And then that's the sort of thing that might be then taken forward and looked at across all of the different chronology entries to see, is that a theme coming through? Is that something that actually, as a result of this review, we need to then take out and embed that learning around professional curiosity and ensuring that all practitioners are aware of what we mean by professional curiosity and how we can demonstrate that within our practice. So yeah, just a couple of examples there of maybe where the chronology doesn't meet the needs and the demands that we need to conduct that review efficiently, and then what we're actually looking for. And if we just go back to that event action analysis, then that just really helps to keep that in your mind when you are completing any chronologies. So in terms of our presentation and training, that is the information there that we've got for you. So we've got a bit of time now if there are any specific questions, or if there's anyone that wants to ask or to know more about either across chronologies themselves or across any part of the review processes for CSPRs, DHRs or SARs, then the floor is yours.
We will say there's no such thing as a stupid question if you've not been
Absolutely.
part of this process or you don't know, just this is your opportunity to ask. I mean, one thing I will add, obviously, as part of the analysis and with the reviewers, they are independent, predominantly most of the time. There might be times when we're doing a discretionary SAR, for example, that we might ask someone over the partnership to pull the report together. There's different methodologies we can use in the SAR process. But one thing, if the analysis is not clear and robust, it will raise questions to the author as to what is happening with that agency and why that agency is not actually able to reflect and pull out where things have maybe not happened as it should within different processes. So, you know, different circumstances applying the legal basis, etc. If that's not recognised in the chronology, the author, it will just raise alarm bells for them, and that'll be a strong recommendation. And we don't really want to be looking at recommendations that are already part of processes and should be as part of a process. So it's extremely important with that. The other point I was going to make is, unfortunately, with the safeguarding adult reviews, we have had an issue with Yorkshire Live previously in publishing a story. Now, unfortunately, it was 2 years after we actually published the report and brought a significant amount of trauma back to the sister who was supporting us with this particular review. Now, as Shani, I think, alluded to, sometimes family members will remain as part of the process and be willing to speak to practitioners, as she were, but unfortunately when Yorkshire Live ran that story, she pulled away and she didn't want to be part of that. So that sometimes might be why we're not putting the report in the public domain. Sometimes as part of, you know, when someone's passed away, there will be a coroner's inquiry, And again, the media might use information disseminated in that process in the media, which has recently happened with one of our SARS. We will not be publishing because we don't want to bring any further trauma on that family, as you'll be aware, unfortunately. Sometimes people cannot be very kind. If there's a story in Yorkshire Live, it'll be on Facebook, and then people are allowed to make comments, which can be completely detrimental for the family. So that's another reason why we may not publish.
Well, sometimes even the media reporting can be really, really traumatic for families. And I think one of the other reasons we might choose not to publish is if to respect the privacy of children as well. So we've had quite a few local circumstances where a family court has determined that no further information about the children subject to review should be published in the public domain in order to protect their privacy and identity, and just try and support them to not be continually reading stuff about their family in the press. So that might be another reason why we might not publish a full report, but we would still, as Alison alluded to earlier, publish learning from those kinds of reviews, and they would feed into any kind of thematic learning. And I guess sometimes we don't wait for the full review to be published before we start doing learning events. So sometimes you might come to something and we might be a bit vague about the circumstances of the incident that's sort of led to us to conduct a review, but that's because it hasn't been published yet, but we feel that the learning's really important, so we really want to share it as soon as we can. And then, so you might read something later that kind of makes you realise why we did that particular learning event. But we do try our best to make sure that we disseminate the learning as soon as it is kind of identified. And that might be without identifying details of the people at the subject of the review. Was there any questions or comments for any of us?
If you were expecting to hear something completely different when you joined the call at the start, then please again tell us that. Or if you feel that we've not quite covered what you needed, then please feel free to tell us. We won't be offended. It's just important that we put on sessions that are useful for people. So any feedback is gratefully received.
And obviously feel free to get in touch with us afterwards as well if you're not comfortable raising anything in a multi-agency group.
I will add the KSAB generic email address in case anybody needs to get in touch.
Thanks, Liz. That's some nice feedback from Michelle.
Yeah.
And we appreciate, when we're sending out these reviews, we all kind of dip in and out of each other's with the child practitioner. So we always have a kind of know how many reviews are taking shape at any one given time. So we do try to take that into account when we're looking at timelines, etc. So we understand, everybody's got a day job as well. So we're, as the boards, partnerships, we do ask for this from staff, which can be quite challenging. So again, if there's any time where you need to get in touch because there's difficulties, please do so. Thank you for your comments. Okay, so I think we can bring it to a close. Thanks everyone. It will be available, so if you do think any of your colleagues will be beneficial to viewing this, it will be available on the online procedures platform, and we'll can circulate it on the general mailing list anyway. So thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.
I hope you found it useful.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.